Hey, Oz Hillman here. Welcome to the webinar, The Joseph Calling. What is a Joseph calling, you might ask? Well, I had the same question back in the 1990s when I went through a season of major adversity that lasted about 7 years, and I didn't know what God was doing in my life. Well, fortunately for me, I met Gunnar Olsson 2 years into my adversity, and he is from Sweden and the founder of the International Christian Chamber of Commerce, and he had great wisdom to share with me at that time. He says, Oz, you have a marketplace call on your life. It's a Joseph call to be a spiritual and physical provider to others. And so for the last 25 years, I've been teaching this concept of understanding our adversity and the Joseph calling. Like Joseph, he went through 13 years of preparation to fulfill a 81-year assignment. And so in this webinar, I'm going to teach you the 4 reasons we go through adversity, the 6 stages that you will go through to fulfill the larger story of your life. You're going to understand why good people go through bad times. And so I know this webinar is going to encourage you and help you in your own calling. So let's get started. Now, let me encourage you to stay to the end because I'm going to share something at the end that will encourage you that you'll want to participate in. So let's begin. God bless you. Welcome to the Joseph Calling webinar, 6 stages to discover, navigate, and fulfill your purpose. Let me ask you a question. Are you fulfilling the larger story of your life? Do you have dreams that are yet to be fulfilled? Do you feel stuck in life? Well, you're at a good place because we're going to help you with that in this webinar. Our goal today is to help you discover the larger story of your life, to turn your disappointments into opportunities. You know, principle number 1 of our session today is that the door to God's larger story almost always includes a crisis event. And that crisis event will drive us either to God, or we might compensate for the pain, or we might even have a shipwrecked faith. There will always be a crisis of belief stage requiring choices. Today we're going to cover what I wrote about in my book, The Joseph Calling, 6 Stages to Discover, Navigate, and Fulfill Your Purpose. In this book, I help you understand the processes that God uses to raise up His leaders, often using adversity. Joseph is the topic of our story today, and we're going to relate to Joseph and then try to draw parallels to our own lives. The story is found in Genesis 37. He was 17 years old, and he was a sheep herder. He was the youngest, favored son of Jacob, and he was a real dreamer, but he also had prophetic gifts. He was the youngest of 10 brothers who were part of a very dysfunctional family, and Joseph was very favored by his brother. Joseph was very favored by his father, and his brothers resented it. Well, Joseph had a dream that his brother's sheaf would bow down to his. He also had a dream of the sun and moon and the 11 stars would also bow down to his. Well, his brothers didn't like it. He was thrown into a pit. His brothers faked his death as if he was killed by a lion, and so they put the lion's blood on the coat, and he became a slave to Potiphar because he was sold to slavery by his brothers. His wife was attracted to Joseph during his service to Potiphar, but he refused sex with her, and she didn't like that, so she accused him. He was accused of rape. He went to prison for a crime he did not do. In prison, he had prophetic gifts, and he had a gift of administration, and God gave him favor. Pharaoh has a dream, and Joseph interprets that dream. He had a reputation as one who could interpret dreams, and he was elevated from the pit and became second in command at age 30 for an 81-year assignment. He had 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine as he served Egypt. He solved Pharaoh's problem. He forgave his brothers and saw a different perspective that God was behind it all. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, he said. Now, Joseph is a type of Jesus. Let's look at Jesus and some of the characteristics of Jesus. He operated in the supernatural in the marketplace. He was sinless. He brought salvation for mankind and suffered for and forgave those he was sent to save. Now, Joseph similarly operated in the supernatural through dreams and words of wisdom, and the word Joseph means increase, he will add. His hardship was not due to sin, and he saved a nation from starvation and suffered for and forgave those he was sent to save. Jesus was betrayed by his own people and the Jews and sold for 30 pieces of silver. He was a physical and spiritual provider to others. He had prophetic ministry to others. He foretold things to come, and he operated in the marketplace. Joseph was betrayed by his own family. He was sold for 20 shekels of silver. He, too, had a physical and spiritual calling to be a provider. He also had a prophetic ministry and foretold things to come, and he operated in the marketplace. You see, Joseph was given privilege, power, and prestige. It takes a special person not to succumb to such temptation. He had geographical control. Joseph was given privilege, power, and prestige. It takes a special person not to succumb to such temptation. He was given geographical control, financial authority, social prestige and royal privileges, political power and religious position. Joseph's story has relevance for all of us, too. You don't have to let life's challenges defeat you. Why not turn it into a new calling? That's exactly what happened to me. I was raised in a family in the South, and my dad was a very successful businessman, and he owned a toy store and later became a president of a large distributorship in the Southeast. He introduced products like the Slinky and sold over 2 million yo-yos in 1966. He introduced me into the game of golf at 11 years old, and I would become a very good golfer later in my junior years and even into college. My dad was a pilot, and he loved to fly, and he would often take executives with him to different places. Well, things changed one day at age 14 when I was watching television, and I saw a news report come across the television that said 3 men had just died in a plane crash, and my dad was the pilot of that plane. And so our lives changed dramatically. I would later turn to be a golf professional. In 1977, I served Vail Golf Club as a golf professional, and I wanted to fulfill my lifelong dream of becoming a golf professional. So I was a golf pro for about 3 years, but I couldn't make a living doing that, and so I decided to go into business, and I would ultimately end up in advertising. I had my own ad agency called the Aslan Group from 1982 to 1994, and we had some great clients like American Express and Steinway Pianos and Thomas Nelson Publishers and Parisian Department Stores, which is now Belk Department Store, and God gave us a good run, and we represented Christ in that business. Well, things were going really good until 1994, and in 1994 my world fell apart. My wife came in one day and said, "I want to separate." And I had a client that represented 80% of our business, and we had a problem with one of the jobs we did, and they fired us over it and stuck us with a $140,000 bill. My vice president left and took my second largest account with him. And then I had investments on the East Coast and West Coast of over $500,000, and I got called by my financial advisor and said, "Your money's all gone. You've been the subject of a Bernie Madoff type of scam." And so my life went from one place to a whole nother place within just a few months, and it would usher me into a 7-year season of adversity. And that crisis really impacted me very deeply. I didn't know what was up. I was thrust into a time of confusion. I was perplexed. I was disoriented and bewildered about what God was doing in my life. And then in 1995, 1 year into my adversity, I had a dream. And that dream was very short. And I saw myself in a large auditorium, and I was looking over my shoulder, and I was looking at thousands of people. Now, that dream didn't make any sense to me, but the only thing that could possibly have been something like that at that time was Promise Keepers, that was very popular in the 1990s. Well, I wasn't a speaker, I wasn't a writer, I wasn't anything other than a broken businessman. Well, in 1996, I met a man named J. Gunnar Olson. And when I met Gunnar, he was the founder of the International Christian Chamber of Commerce. And someone sent me a tape that was by him that said God is raising up Josephs all over the world. And it's often signified by them going through extraordinary adversity in their business and personal life. I said, I've got to meet that man. And so I flew to Washington 2 months later, where he was going to be, and he was opening a 75-nation conference that day. And I saw him that night, and he allowed me to come to his suite and talk to him, which is a miracle in itself. And he listened to my story, and he said, Os, you have a Joseph calling on your life. And I didn't know what that meant. And so he began to explain it to me. And that day, Gunnar became my spiritual mentor in the marketplace, and he helped me so much. Well, 7 years later, God would turn that Valley of Achor into a new calling. I would begin writing books. I wrote the devotional TGIF, Today God is First, and I've now written 18 books as of this presentation. And God turned my Valley of Achor into a door of hope. I started writing TGIF, Today God is First, in the late 90s and published the book in the year 2000. And God began to connect me with people all over the world through my simple little devotional. I began writing the devotional out of my own need to understand what God was doing in my life. I wasn't writing it for other people, but so often today, the most common thing people say is, you spoke to me right where I am in my own journey. And that seems to be how the Holy Spirit uses it in most people's life. And so now we're in 104 nations with the devotional, and God has turned my adversity into a new calling to speak to leaders in 26 countries and churches and conferences. And by the way, that dream I had, 17 years later, I spoke at Promise Keepers 3 times. That was the vision God was giving me, even in the midst of my own challenges. But how does all this relate to you? Well, sometimes our dreams seem like they're in a holding pattern. Sometimes we need to help to understand what God is doing in our life and how to take the next step. And sometimes we go through seasons of adversity that seem to thwart the purposes of God in our life. Is that what is happening? Or could it be that these times are meant to prepare us for the ultimate assignment He has created for us? We need to realize our dreams. But visions often die before they become a reality. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed, it says in Romans 8:19. You know, I thought my calling was to publish a magazine called Christians in Business. And so I launched this in 1996, only to fail at it again. I would lose over $50,000 on that project, and it wasn't what God had in mind for me at that time. I discovered later that God often takes us through 6 stages of a process to bring us into the larger story of our life. The first one is recruitment. God often recruits us through some type of crisis, and so often that recruitment can be very painful. The Apostle Paul was recruited through a blindness that Jesus laid upon him in order to get his attention. Martin Luther posted his thesis on a door and led him into a crisis that would ultimately become the Protestant Reformation. And of course, we've already talked about Joseph. Esther was ushered into a major crisis by risking her life to stand in front of the king in order to stand for her people. And of course, David, who fought Goliath, and his life would ever change. And how about Martin Luther King, who stood up for the woman who decided to not give up her seat on the bus, and at age 26 took upon himself the civil rights movement. Number 2 is character development. God often raises us up through character development. Now, I've discovered that there are often 4 reasons for adversity. The first one is a consequence of the call, just like Joseph. Number 2 is sin, that we can often go through adversity because of sin. And we see how Gehazi, who was the assistant to Elisha, tried to get money from a general for the healing that happened through Elisha. And God didn't like that, and so he struck him with leprosy. So sin resulted in a crisis for Gehazi. The third reason is sonship. In Hebrews 12:5, it tells us that we are sons and daughters of God, and so he's going to treat us that way, and he's going to reproof us so that we can fulfill the destiny he has for us. In Hebrews 12, it says, "For they indeed, for a few days, our fathers, chastened us as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who've been trained by it." The fourth reason is spiritual warfare. John 10:10 says that Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus comes to give us life and life abundantly. We live in a war zone, and Satan doesn't want you to fulfill your purpose. You see, the depth and width of our adversity often corresponds to the level of call and the ministry he plans through your life. Just think about Moses and Paul and Joseph. They had an expansive ministry, but they had great adversity as well. Is this what you feel like? Do you feel trapped? Do you feel like you can't get out of the adversity that you're in? You know, one of the stages I've found in the Joseph calling is the black hole. It's a place where you can't do anything right. You can't get a job. You can't make things work. You're in a bad marriage, and just nothing is working. That's the black hole. It's usually in the first phase of a Joseph calling. You know, God said he would never leave us or forsake us. However, he never said it might not feel like he did. God doesn't close one door without opening another, but it can be hell in the hallway. This is your Bethel. It's a time for you to deal with God. The third stage is the isolation stage. And here is where God turns messes into messages into messengers. And so often God downloads things in our life. Psalm 31:20 says, "You shall hide them in the secret place of your presence." He reveals secret things in hidden places. Isaiah 45:3 says, John Bunyan wrote Pilgrim's Progress during a time of 12 years in prison. The Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation on the island of Patmos. Job 36:15 says, "He delivers the poor in their affliction and opens their ears in oppression." The fourth stage is the cross phase. And I've discovered that every leader who goes through this Joseph process will have a betrayal that ultimately leads them to really washing the feet of their Judas. Just like Jesus, who washed the feet of his Judas, we all have to pass this graduate level test of loving our enemies. For David, it was Absalom. For Joseph, it was his brothers. You see, we could all put 2 nails in our cross, but we can't do anything about that third nail, and so he raises someone up to test us and bring us to the end of ourselves. Number 5 is problem solving. Every leader that has influence is a problem solver. Josephs are problem solvers through invention and entrepreneurship. Let me ask you a question. Why was Jesus so influential? Well, it's because he solved problems. He solved Peter's fishing problem. He solved Peter's tax problems. He fed the 5,000 people when there was no food. He solved the blind man's seeing problem. He solved the prostitute's problem and kept her from being stoned. The people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits, it says in Daniel 11:32. I love the story of George Washington Carver, who was a problem solver. He was born in the time of great persecution and discrimination, and his mother was sold into slavery. But he had an inventive mind, and he told the farmers that you got to stop planting cotton and start planting other crops because the land could no longer handle it. And so he convinced the farmers to plant peanuts and sweet potatoes. The only problem was there wasn't enough demand for peanuts and sweet potatoes. So he went into his lab and he walked out in the fields and he asked God a question. God, why did you make the peanut and the sweet potato? And God gave him 300 marketable products from the peanut and 100 from the sweet potato. He literally transformed the Southern economy as a result of that. Number 6 is networks. God works through networks. You know, he came up with a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit network. Each member has a role to play in the Godhead. Change happens by a small number of change agents banding together. I love the story of England's Wilberforce. He had something called the Clapham Group, about 18 individuals that came together to effect social change in England. The first major project they took on was abolishment of slavery, but they would ultimately abolish slavery after 30 years of work, but they would have 69 different culture-shaping initiatives that impacted culture. James Davison Hunter, who wrote the book To Change the World, said, "The key actor in history is not individual genius, but rather the network and the new institutions that are created out of these networks. And the more dense the network, that is, the more active and interactive the network, the more influential it could be." Jesus said, "I do not pray for these alone, but also for those who believe in me through their word, that they all may be one as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me." In Genesis 11:6, we see God describing the people at Babel. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they have all one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them." Now, they used unity in the wrong way to protect themselves from God. However, the principle of working together is still a solid principle of effecting change. So there you have it, the 6 stages of the call of a change agent: recruitment, character, isolation, cross, problem solving, and networks. I encourage you to think about those stages in your own life to see if God has used those stages in your life. You know, I realize my God-given assignment in life is to help others discover and fulfill their purpose in life. And I want to help you fulfill your purpose. That's why I created the Joseph Calling Master Class and Coaching Program. It's a 8-session course that we created to help people like yourself to fulfill their destiny. It has 8 powerful sessions. The first one is discovering your purpose. It's so vitally important for you to understand your purpose. Session 2 is, do you have a Joseph Calling? We'll help you understand in more detail what a Joseph Calling is and how to navigate through it. We'll get in more detail about the 6 stages of the Joseph Calling and how to turn your messes into messages and messengers. We'll look at the isolation and the cross phase. We'll go in depth at the problem solving and network stage, and we'll also talk about overcoming hindrances to fulfill your destiny. What are the hindrances that are keeping you from fulfilling your destiny? We'll look at hearing God in your work-life call and my top 10 golden rules for success. And our final session will be understanding and walking in your authority to experience miracles. Each of these sessions, if taught alone, would have a value of about $67. So the value of just these 8 sessions on The retail value that we would normally call charge would be $536. But stay tuned. I've got some good news for you as it relates to that. As part of the course, you'll have access to our private Facebook site. We call it our TGI Inner Circle community. It's where our Change Agent Network members convene and also our monthly donors. And it's also a place that you'll have access to discuss the course. We place a value of that about $27 a month. So the offer, in summarizing the value of the course, would be $536 and $54 for 2 months, and then that comes to about $590. Now let's listen to a testimony from Ike, who was an investment manager in Atlanta, about his experience with the Joseph Calling training.
Hi, my name is Ike, and I recently attended the Joseph Calling Conference here in Atlanta. This conference really impacted my life. Specifically, it helped me to understand the process that God puts us through in between the time when He reveals that He has a high calling upon our life, and that calling is realized. Far too often, we don't understand or fully comprehend the level of adversity and challenges that we have to go through. For instance, if He has said to you, you're going to be a great man of faith, you probably don't fully understand or comprehend the level or the kinds of circumstances that God will orchestrate in your life to bring about the fulfillment of that promise. So I would highly recommend anybody to attend the conference if you're struggling with reconciling some of the processes that you're going through in between the revelation of the call that God has shared with you about your life and its fulfillment. I highly encourage you to attend the conference.
Let's also listen to Denise Campbell, an executive out of Chicago in the media, and how she went through the Joseph process with me as well.
Hi, my name is Denise Campbell, and I am a Joseph. I am a Josephine, and actually Oz talks about me in his latest book, The Joseph Calling. I met Oz when I was already years into my Joseph experience, although I did not know what it was. I met him 7 months after the Lord woke me up at night and told me that I have a Joseph calling on my life. Meeting Oz and getting a hold of his first book, The Upside of Adversity, was a lifesaver and was life-altering. I began to study his website. I began to seek what his devotion, TGIF, had to say daily. And I began to really get some insight and some direction and some hope. A hope that really gave me that this is what God is doing, and He's developing character and trust in me. I began to understand from his book that God was taking me through stages and through detours to make sure that I understood that He was my source in everything. And as I began to read even The Joseph Calling, his latest book, it has been invaluable. So instruction from Oz Hillman have been invaluable in my life, in my journey, in my process. It has taught me to wait and trust God throughout the process, and it has really been a light in the black hole, the journey of becoming and going through what it's like to be a Joseph for God's agenda. I thank Oz for his material, and any instruction I would fully endorse, because he indeed is gifted to teach people who have been called to this assignment in their lives. And may God continue to bless him as he instructs those that will come under his teaching. He will be a light in a dark place. Thank you.
Let me ask you about the value of having relationships with people. How valuable do you think it was in my meeting with Gunnar Olsen in 1996? Well, it's impossible to put a price on that because it has impacted my life so greatly. You know, Gary Frey is someone I've been able to help over the years and helping him understand his Joseph process. He read my book, Upside of Adversity, and most recently, my book, The Joseph Calling.
Hey everyone, this is Gary Frey. Hope you're doing great. Oz Hillman and I have become friends over the past 10 years since I first hosted an event for successful business people and had him speak at it. After hearing more of his story and reading one of his books that's become one of my favorites called The Upside of Adversity, we've really connected, and I have given away dozens of that book, in particular for people that are trying to find meaning and purpose in the midst of pain and suffering and trials that they are going through. And his newest book, The Joseph Calling, it dovetails very, very nicely with that, and it's going to be another one that I'm going to give away quite frequently. It's quite good. I hope you get it. Enjoy it. Bye-bye.
Now, as part of the course, we're going to include 3 bonus gifts when you enroll. The first one is a signed copy of my book, The Joseph Calling. That has a $30 value. And we're going to provide a 12-week study course on the Joseph Calling, and that has a $37 value. And then we're going to include a 2-part course, video course, called Receiving Your Inheritance. And this course will help you understand how to really engage with God to receive everything that God has planned for your life. And so the value of that course is $197. So looking at the bonus summary, we have the signed copy of the book and the Joseph Calling personal study and the Receiving Your Inheritance home study course, and that has a total value of $264. Several years ago, I heard a wonderful story by David Ogilvy, the founder of Ogilvy and Mather Advertising. And he was consulting with a businessman one time, and the businessman was having difficulty in his business, and he knew Ogilvy could give him the answer that he needed to solve his problem. And so he asked him if he would go to lunch with him, and he would be willing to pay him for his time. And so they went to lunch, and Ogilvy listened to him, and then after listening to him, gave him the answer. Well, the man was amazed. He couldn't believe that he got the answer so quickly. He says, "What do I owe you?" Well, Ogilvy turns with a straight face and says, $5,000. Well, the man couldn't believe it. He says, "You're going to charge me $5,000 for something that took you 5 minutes to do?" "Actually, sir," responded Ogilvy, "it took me 25 years to be able to give you that answer." He's talking about experience and the hard knocks and what we learn in those times. Now, after my days as an ad agency owner, I was a consultant. And I charged $2,000 a day for my consulting time, and that's because I had the experience and professional expertise to help companies navigate through their own business strategies and to help them. You know, my cost for consulting and Q&A used to be over $2,000 a day, but now it's $125 an hour. You know, why is knowledge and wisdom so valuable? Well, my mistakes and what I've learned save you from making the same mistakes. And it helps you to make money, helps you to have the know-how and the guidance. You see, knowledge comes from learning. Wisdom comes from living and experience. So let's take a look at a summary of the value of this course. If we were to charge the retail on this course, it would come to $854. Now, I want you to listen to this comment from Bill Ham, who has gone through a mentoring process with me, and let him tell you why the Joseph process has been so important in his life.
First, I want to talk about Oz. Oz literally saved my life. I had just gone through the most incredible experience in my company. 1999, we were an industrial mechanical construction company, and the Lord saw fit to have us lose $7 million in 1 year with a $5 million balance sheet. Now that's underwater, folks. That is bankruptcy. That's all those kind of things. But praise God, we didn't have to file bankruptcy, and I'll tell you briefly about that. But this man, I got one of his pass-alongs. It was Sowing in Tears. I'll never forget it. It's my favorite. Mm-hmm. And when I read it, I got it from a brother that was in Fellowship of Companies for Christ. And when I read it, I said, man, I got to meet this guy. This guy is the guy that's going to give me a lifeline. And literally, I got a lifeline from Oz Hillman. we communicated some, and briefly, Oz was always so generous to respond to my emails. In fact, I went to his home in 2002. It's kind of like the deal with Gunnar Olson, except in my case, it was Oz Hillman. And I called this guy up who had all these thousands of readership, and I said, I'm going to come to Atlanta, I'm going to come to your house. He said, come on. So I did. And we began a wonderful relationship at that time, and it spanned these 15 years. So I wanted to say that first.
Now, there are other things you're going to learn that include why knowing your purpose is key to fulfilling your purpose. We'll help you discover your purpose and write out your statement, whether you have a Joseph calling and how to embrace it, why God often allows a vision to die first before he fulfills it, and how God uses finances or lack of finances to direct your steps. You'll understand the role adversity plays in fulfilling your purpose and my top 10 golden rules for success. You'll discover how to leverage your adversity for a new calling and career, why some people don't fulfill their purpose, and how you can avoid being one of them. You'll discover how to embrace your adversity and gain incredible benefits from your valley experience, and why the level of adversity corresponds to the depth and width of your influence. You'll discover why disruptions are first signals that you're about to get an upgrade with God and a new assignment. Now let's listen to Aaron Smith, an investment manager in Switzerland, about his journey and how the Joseph calling teaching has affected him.
Hi, my name is Aaron Smith. I run an investment management firm here in Zurich, Switzerland, where I live with my wife and 2 little girls. A senior executive at Credit Suisse gave me my first copy of TGIF back in 2013, and it's been very powerful in my life since then. I can testify that Oz Hillman is a man of integrity. He's anointed, and he's got a tremendous calling on his life. He is soft-spoken, straightforward, and has a very powerful delivery. As a younger brother in the Lord, I feel so humbled to be able to call Oz Hillman my friend. The Joseph calling itself is such an important teaching, especially for those today who truly love the Lord. They're truly seeking the Lord with all their heart, but they're facing tremendous opposition and adversity in their life and trying to make sense of it all. And I think that what I appreciate most about Oz is the fact that he's not just teaching this, but he's walking it out. And I believe that this masterclass will be a time of deep, deep revelation, anointing, and impartation. That's certainly my prayer and my hope. And I believe that Oz will be instrumental in raising up a new core, a new generation of leaders that will make impact for the kingdom and the glory of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
You'll also discover deeper understanding of the 6 stages all Josephs and leaders go through, and what you can learn and apply from the 6 stages of David, Moses, Joseph, Jacob, and Paul, and how to use their spiritual authority to break through the obstacles. You'll learn from other modern-day workplace leaders who successfully walked through their Joseph process, and a whole lot more. So the 8-session masterclass, all classes are available immediately upon payment. You'll be able to access them 24/7 for 6 months. You'll be able to replay as often as you like to go back and study different principles that I'm sharing in the course. Now, in summary, the value of the course is around $854, but that's not what we're charging. Now, what if we charge $490? That would really be a good value, but we're not charging that either. In fact, we're only charging $197 for the course, and if you need to split up your payments, you can pay it in 3 installments at $79 each. Plus, you have a money-back guarantee if after seeing at least 3 courses, you're not satisfied, then you can get your money back, no questions asked. So consider joining us in the 8-week program that actually has all 8 weeks on one website that you can access any time of the day. Now, let me ask you a few other questions. What if all this did was help you discover your purpose? Or what if all this did was help you understand God's reason for your adversity? Or that all this did was give you the process by which God raises his leaders? Wouldn't it be worth it? You know, we all need encouragement. A typical ministry conference would be $250 to $500 for a 2-day conference. A week-long conference would be $700 to $1,000 or more, plus airfare costs, hotel costs, Uber or cab ride or car rental fees. Finally, let's listen to Mark Shattuck, a close friend of mine who's an architect in Atlanta and has gone through our training. Let's hear what he has to say.
Been a longtime friend of Oz's, and receiving his TGIF devotionals have just been incredibly influential in my life. Also read many of his books, and so I knew that I wanted to come to this conference, as well as bring in a friend who's a close colleague of mine, and in a process where I knew this conference material would be just life-changing for him. I've been walking in an entrepreneurial calling, but at the same time coming out of a missionary background, and the blend of and the confusion of, you know, full-time ministry calling versus going into a secular calling has always been something that a lot of people have struggled with. Os's message that, you know, the mission field of the business world is just as valid as another country was just revolutionary to me and really freeing, and always wanting to get deeper and deeper into that. But God has been doing a huge thing in my life the last 12 years, and I know that I need to surround myself with other people and the teaching that is going deeper into the heart of God, especially in the workplace. It offers so much at so many different levels. It's impossible to put it into one statement, but I know that I would recommend anybody who really wants to walk in the calling that God has for them. This is a place where they're going to get an enormous amount of help, information, a community, and an ongoing process that'll continue to feed into where they're trying to go, rather than just some good info, good notes, and good luck as that you're on your own. It'll be a process that'll keep yielding a lot of fruit.
So in summary, the course is only $197, and as I say, you can split the payments. You can split the payments with the option of paying 3 payments of $79. Now, some of you might be in your pit and you can't afford this, and we understand that. But we never want our training to be limited by finances, and that's why we give payment options, and we have partial scholarships. Now, we don't have any full scholarships because we've learned over the years that if you don't have skin in the game, you won't take it seriously. And so we require you to pay something as part of the course. In order to apply for a scholarship, you'll need to contact Monica at marketplaceleaders.org and just explain to her your situation. And that's Monica at marketplaceleaders.org. So that's it for today. I hope that you'll join us in this 8-session course. All you do to begin is click on the link below to get started, and you'll get immediate access to all 8 sessions, plus your 3 bonuses will be shipped to you as soon as we receive your enrollment. God bless you.